Hey everyone, I am Don Rosary B. Marinduki, and today I am going to report about constructivist teaching, interactive, collaborative, integrative, and inquiry-based. Here are our objectives. First one, define constructivist teaching, interactive, collaborative, integrative, and inquiry-based. Appreciate and profoundly understand the value and importance of constructivist teaching, interactive, collaborative, integrative, and inquiry-based. Third one, create, provide examples and teachers' tasks on constructivist teaching, interactive, collaborative, integrative, and inquiry-based. So what is constructivist teaching? Constructivist teaching is based on the belief that learning occurs as learners are actively involved in a process of meaning and knowledge construction, rather than passively learners are the makers of meaning and knowledge. Teacher fosters critical thinking and creates motivated and independent learners. Constructivist learning activities. Constructivist learning activity lessons focus on explanations and answers to problems or questions. The explanations and answers come from learners, not from the teacher, and derived from content representations and social interaction. The teacher helps students construct knowledge by guiding the social interaction and providing content representation. Constructivist lessons face students with a question that serves as a focus for the lesson. Students are active, both in their groups and in whole class discussion. Students are given autonomy and control to work on their own. Students develop understandings that make sense to them. Students also acquire understandings that can be applied to the everyday world. Constructivist lessons are intrinsically motivating because they stimulate curiosity, keep learners actively involved, autonomous, and controlling of what they learn. This also increases motivation, which results in children learning more. Reciprocal teaching and learning. It allows pairs of students to teach each other. Inquiry-based learning, or IBL, learners pose their own questions and seek answers to their questions via research and direct observation. They present their supporting evidence to answer the questions. They draw connections between their pre-existing knowledge and the knowledge they've acquired through the activity. Finally, they draw conclusions, highlight remaining gaps in knowledge, and develop plans for future investigations. Problem-based learning, or PBL. The main idea of PBL is similar to IBL. Learners acquire knowledge by devising a solution to a problem. PBL differs from IBL in that PBL activities provide students with real-world problems that require students to work together to devise a solution. As the group works through the challenging real-world problem, learners acquire communication and collaboration skills in addition to knowledge. Cooperative learning. Students work together in small groups to maximize their own and each other's learning. Cooperative learning differs from typical group work in that it requires interdependence among group members to solve a problem or complete an assignment. A classroom example of constructivist teaching. As a researcher of constructivist teaching, I visited Pat Gray's classroom. His secondary language arts program exemplify the attributes of constructivist teaching: learner-centered instruction in a democratic environment, active learners who build and create meaning and knowledge, learners who hypothesize, question, investigate, imagine, and invent, learners who reflect and make associations with prior knowledge to reach new understandings. Colorfully illustrated children's dictionaries, student-created serial postcards storing imaginary holiday adventures, and visual responses to poetry decorated the hallway leading into Pat's classroom. In the classroom itself, an abundance of student work was displayed throughout the room. Posted on all available bulletin board space was an uncommon and diverse array of written and visual student productions. Sometimes, several revised drafts of a written creation being exhibited to demonstrate the process involved in the product. In one corner of the ceiling was a compelling mobile, an imaginative and sensitive response to literature, as evidenced by the representation of characters: Laura, Amanda, Tom, and Jim, the characters from Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. There they hung, delicately suspended in their own separate worlds, connected only by a thin filament of thread, the infrangible ties of family and past history. And at the back and center of the room was an imposing 5-foot-tall oak tree, with some ordinary construction paper, marking pens, and an interesting and resourceful treatment of various other types of art materials. An inventive group of students had depicted an intriguing and fascinating response to Kill a Mockingbird. The oak tree was, in fact, a museum to house important artifacts from the story. A number of years prior to the visit, I had been a guest in Pat's classroom, and the same kind of richness of student work and activity had greeted me at the time. And a warm image of an elementary classroom had been brought to mind. I remember the room was filled with red geraniums in terracotta pots and contained round tables instead of the usual student desks. And although the first class of the day hadn't yet begun, the room already contained many configurations of grade 9 students with an obvious sense of ownership of the classroom as they engaged themselves in an assortment of activities. One student busied herself watering the geraniums, while two students, contorted faces pressed close to the aquarium glass, tried to engage the goldfish in a conversation. At a corner table, a huddled couple intently examined a Life magazine while next to them. A lively group of 3 or 4 students was occupied in transforming a rather large chunk of white Bristol board into a lively-looking collage. Their teacher was surrounded by a small group of laughing students involved in some discussion, and I remember I was impressed by the ease and comfort with which they interacted with him, and the affection they seemed to have for him. It being only the second week in September and Pat being in the new school, it was obvious to me that people enjoyed living there. And now, as a graduate student, my research took me back to Pat's classroom where the experience once again was memorable. A class of grade 10 students arranged themselves in their groups in which they had been working the previous day. They were involved in a group translation into contemporary English of Julius Caesar, each of 5 groups translating a different act. In their attempts to modernize and present Shakespeare's work, students were required to come to an understanding of characters and events in the play, which would determine verbal and nonverbal representations. Later, the students would enact, in full costume, one scene of their choice from their contemporary constructions, with the remainder of the scenes to be presented in a reader's theater. While the costumes for the enactment would be contemporary, the students had to make decisions regarding the most appropriate costumes for each character, based on their own interpretations of and transactions with Shakespeare's text. The exercise was, as Pat later told me, an experience from which they would come to an understanding of linguistic evolution and character development. As I wandered from group to group, I encountered interesting and often entertaining discussions as students in the groups negotiated interpretations of Shakespearean discourse and debated how particular characters might say their new constructions. In the meantime, Pat was visiting each group, providing assistance where necessary, and probing to elicit personal responses and to encourage depth in their discussions. Who's your favorite character in your act? Cassius. Tell me about Cassius. Why do you like him? And so the conversation in the class continued. The Constructivist classroom. A Constructivist teacher and a Constructivist classroom exhibit a number of discernible qualities markedly different from a traditional or direct instruction classroom. A Constructivist teacher is able to flexibly and creatively incorporate ongoing experiences in the classroom into the negotiation and construction of lessons with small groups and individuals. The environment is democratic, the activities are interactive and student-centered, and the students are empowered by a teacher who operates as a facilitator or consultant. Constructivist classrooms are structured so that learners are immersed in experiences within which they may engage in meaning-making inquiry, action, imagination, invention, interaction, hypothesizing, and personal reflection. Teachers need to recognize how people use their own experiences, prior knowledge, and perceptions, as well as their physical and interpersonal environments to construct knowledge and meaning. The goal is to produce a democratic classroom environment that provides meaningful learning experiences for autonomous learners. This perspective of learning presents an alternative view of what is regarded as knowledge, suggesting that there may be many ways of interpreting and understanding of the world. No longer is the teacher seen as an expert, who knows the answer to the questions she or he has constructed, while the students are asked to identify their teacher's constructions rather than to construct their own meanings. In a constructivist classroom, students are encouraged to use prior experiences to help them form and reform interpretations. This may be illustrated by reference to a personal response approach to literature, a constructivist strategy first articulated by Rosenblatt in 1938. Rosenblatt argues for personal and constructive response to literature, whereby students' own experiences and perceptions are brought to the reading task so that in transacting with the text, the realities and interpretation which the students construct are their own. A reader response approach to literature rejects the idea that all students should necessarily come to the same interpretation of a selection of literature, that single interpretation being the teacher's or someone else's. A reader response approach allows students to explore variant interpretations, the teacher's own interpretation being only one possible interpretation in the classroom. In a traditional classroom, an invisible and imposing, at times, impenetrable barrier between student and teacher exists through power and practice. In a constructivist classroom, by contrast, the teacher and the student share responsibility and decision-making and demonstrate mutual respect. The democratic and interactive process of a constructivist classroom allows students to be active and autonomous learners. Using constructivist strategies, teachers are more effective. They are able to promote communication and create flexibility so that the needs of all students can be met. The learning relationship in a constructivist classroom is mutually beneficial to both students and teachers. A constructivist classroom is student-centered. A constructivist classroom is a student-centered classroom. The student-centeredness of a constructivist classroom is clearly apparent in a reader-response approach to literature, recognizing the significance of the unique experiences that each reader brings to the reading of a selection of literature. The teacher, in a response-centered approach, seeks to explore the transaction between the student and the text to promote or extract a meaningful response. This places the student in a central position in the classroom, since exploring this transaction seems unlikely to occur unless the teacher is willing to relinquish the traditional position of sole authority, thereby legitimating the unique experiences that all members of the class bring to the reading, rather than just those experiences the teacher brings. The resulting perception and effect in the classroom is evident in students' recognition that the discussion is a legitimate one involving questions to which nobody knows the answer. It isn't a treasure hunting game where they are trying to guess what it is in their teacher's head, but a process that creates meaning and knowledge. From a constructivist perspective, where the student is perceived as the meaning maker, teacher-centered, text-centered, and skills-oriented, approaches to literature instruction are replaced by more student-centered approaches, where processes of understanding are emphasized. In a discussion of language arts instruction based on constructivist theories of language use and language development, Appleby suggests that rather than treating the subject of English as subject matter to be memorized, a constructivist approach treats it as a body of knowledge, skills, and strategies that must be constructed by the learner out of experiences and interactions within the social context of the classroom. In such a tradition, understanding of a work of literature does not mean memorizing someone else's interpretations, but constructing and elaborating upon one's within the constraints of the text and the conventions of the classroom discourse community. A constructivist student-centered approach places more focus on students' learning than on teachers' teaching. A traditional perspective focuses more on teaching. From a constructivist view, knowing occurs by a process of construction by the knower. Lindfors advises that how we teach should originate from how students learn. Constructivism uses as a process. What is essentially involved in constructivist strategies and activities is a process approach to learning. Appleby remarks that rather than emphasizing characteristics of the final products, process-oriented instruction focuses on the language and problem-solving strategies that students need to learn in order to generate those products. And as students interact with their teacher and with each other as part of either whole class activities, small groups, or individual activities, they practice using language in a variety of contexts, developing and honing many different skills as they do so. In a process approach, Langer and Appleby explain, a context is created within which students are able to explore new ideas and experiences. Within this context, a teacher's role in providing information decreases and is replaced by a strengthened role in eliciting and supporting students' own thinking and meaning-making abilities. In a process approach to learning, ideas are allowed to develop in the learner's own mind through a series of related, supportive activities where taking risks and generating hypotheses are encouraged by postponing evaluation, and where new skills are learned in supportive instructional contexts. Appleby and Langer argue that in such contexts, students have the best chance to focus on the ideas they are writing about and to develop more complex thinking and reasoning skills as they defend their ideas for themselves. Constructivist activities in any subject area can range from very simple to sophisticated and complex, depending on the teacher's learning activities. So if a teacher were to devise a constructivist activity, the first thing that she or he would have to do is to establish an educational objective. The teacher would then need to think of a meaningful activity which would, at the same time, help students to reach the objective and to explore and construct knowledge based on what they're reading and what they already bring to the activity. The teacher would also need to re-examine the mechanics of how to run a class and would have to entrust a lot to the students. This is demonstrated in the following activity involving the prologue to the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, which Pat developed to achieve a variety of language arts objectives. My class and I began by examining the linguistic evolution of the English language, including Middle English, in which Geoffrey Chaucer writes. I then provided each student with Chaucer's text in Middle English. Next, I gave each a pronunciation guide. Finally, to the whole class, I read the introduction to the prologue in Middle English, and as a class, we translated it. I then provided a brief character sketch of each character in the prologue, after which each student elected to join a character group of his or her choice, for example, the squire, the group's task being to become an expert on the particular character which they had selected. Each group was then provided with a chart on which they were to record the various aspects of their character's condition. The group's next undertaking was to rehearse a dramatic oral reading of their character's portion of the prologue. So in doing so, each group began, with assistance when required, to come to an understanding of their character. Then each group was expected to thoroughly research their character, in order to come to a better understanding of the historical persona on whom Chaucer based his literary rendering and to place that character into a social, historical, and cultural text. The pre-existing character groups were then split up, and students were instructed to form new groups of 3 or 4, none of which could contain more than one of the same character. Then, their task was to complete an activity called table talk at the tabard, in which each group was asked to create and script a playlet among the 3 or 4 characters, the purpose of which was to bring to life each of the characters. By the time the students had seen everybody else's presentation, they had at least a passing knowledge of and an appreciation of all of Chaucer's characters along with the language of Chaucer's time. The possibilities for constructivist activities are limitless. It is important, however, regardless of subject area, to provide enough activities for student choice and to encourage student-generated activities. Constructivist teaching is an exceptionally interesting and exciting way to teach because students are involved in learning activities they appear to enjoy, and much more student-teacher contact is possible. It extends one's impact as a teacher. Constructivist teaching involves negotiation. Negotiation is an important aspect of a constructivist classroom. It unites teacher and students in one common purpose. Smith confirms that negotiating curriculum means custom building classes every day to fit the individuals who attend. Boomer explains that it is important when negotiating for teachers to talk openly about how new information may be learned and about constraints such as obligatory curriculum. He comments on the meaning of negotiating the curriculum. Negotiating the curriculum means deliberately planning to invite students to contribute and to modify the educational program so that they will have a real investment both in the learning journey and the outcomes. Negotiation also means making explicit and then confronting the constraints of the learning context and the non-negotiable requirements that apply. Cook explains why negotiating the curriculum with the students is important. Learners will work harder and better, and what they learn will mean more to them if they are rediscovering their own ideas, asking their own questions, and fighting hard to answer them for themselves. They must be educational decision makers. Out of negotiation comes a sense of ownership in learners for the work they are to do, and therefore a commitment to it. A constructivist teacher offers his or her students options and choices in their work. Rejecting the common practice of telling students what to do, he or she engages their trust and invites them to participate in a constructivist process that allows them to be involved in decisions about their learning. Students are actively involved in their own learning is a vital reality in a constructivist classroom. Students may participate in the construction of the curriculum by negotiating the themes that will be the focus of their work along with a selection of literature from a predetermined range of literature. Students may also participate in the design of their assignments, although the parameters for these may be established by their teacher. Finally, students may have some involvement in the way their assignments are evaluated. The teacher in a constructivist classroom is a researcher. A crucially important aspect of teachers' job is watching, listening, and asking questions of students in order to learn about them and about how they learn so that teachers may be more helpful to students. Calkins notes that there is a thin line between research and teaching. At the same time that we teach children, they also teach us because they show us how they learn. We just have to carefully watch them and listen to them. This kind of watching and listening may contribute to a teacher's ability to use what the classroom experience provides to help him or her create contextualized and meaningful lessons for small groups and individuals. The ability to observe and listen to one's students and their experiences in the classroom contributes to his or her ability to use a constructivist approach. Paradoxically, a constructivist approach contributes to one's ability to observe and listen in the classroom. Thus, the process is circular. Students and teachers are interactive in a constructivist classroom. Another quality of a constructivist class is its interactive nature. Authentic student and student-teacher dialogue is very important in a constructivist classroom. Belenky, Clincy, Goldberger, and Tarul inform us that constructivists distinguish didactic talk when participants report experiences but no new understanding occurs, from real talk where careful listening creates an environment within which emerging ideas can grow. Perhaps this defines the difference between teacher talk in a direct instruction classroom and purposeful talk by students in a student-centered constructivist classroom, where meaningful discussion occurs and meanings emerge. Belenky explained that in real talk, domination is absent, while reciprocity, cooperation, and collaborative involvement are prominent. Consequently, constructivist activities in the classroom that focus on speaking and listening promote not only constructivist thought, but also important connections between teacher and students. Organization and management of a constructivist classroom are democratic. The organization and management of a class contribute appreciably to the creation of a classroom environment that promotes constructivist learning. A democratic classroom environment emphasizes shared responsibility and decision-making. It is generally accepted that practices which typify democratic classrooms include acknowledgement of the importance of human experience in learning, accommodation of small groups, individuals, and occasionally the whole class in instruction. Creation of an environment that supports the active involvement of students in collaborative and empowering activities such as the exchange of ideas and opinions, and responsibility for making decisions about learning and for generating flexible rules, and teacher focus on students' learning rather than on teacher performance. Lester and Honor suggest that the attitudes, values, and beliefs of a teacher, specifically those related to the belief of student as a constructor of knowledge, make it possible to create a democratic environment. A democratic classroom is self-regulating. Rather than overtly controlling the students, a constructivist teacher structures the classroom so that students and teacher can share in the control of their environment. Students are directly involved in all matters that occur in the classroom that affect their being there as learners and as people. However, as Lester and Honor discovered, changing any one aspect of a classroom, in particular how language is used, isn't possible without simultaneously changing who has power and control over knowledge. Indeed, since student empowerment and autonomy are major goals in constructivist teaching, changing the power structure in the classroom is a desired course of action. Power and control in the constructivist classroom are shared. Student empowerment is, in fact, at the center of a constructivist teacher's philosophy. Like parents who, from the moment their child is born, do everything possible to ensure that their child has the skills and abilities to live independently, one of them. So, a constructivist teacher, from the moment a new set of students enter his or her classroom, does everything he or she can to provide those students with the skills and abilities to be confident and autonomous learners and citizens. And like parents who take pride in their children's accomplishments but not credit, a constructivist teacher doesn't take the glory for the accomplishment of his or her students, but rather empowers them with a feeling of competence and success. Student empowerment and autonomy may be aided by encouraging students to ask questions and by making them active learners. Calkin laments that in most classrooms, we neither teach students to ask questions in schools nor allow students to ask questions. And like parents who take pride in their children's accomplishments, especially if students are continually encouraged to ask more probing, more appropriate and more effective questions. By asking their own questions, students acquire more consciousness of and control over their thinking. Students having control over their thinking is an important matter in a constructivist classroom. The lack of opportunity for students to ask their own questions is a very real concern in many classrooms. And so exploring ways of getting students to ask questions rather than the teaching asking all the questions may make a significant contribution to making students independent as language learners. The person who asks the questions not only has the answers but also has the power. Power is a key element in a constructivist classroom. Power is not wielded by a constructivist teacher, and control is not imposed on students. Instead, a constructivist teacher uses an indirect form of control and empowers students by involving them, by giving them responsibility, and by encouraging them to be self-controlling and autonomous. While the teacher relinquishes power and control to empower the students, neither the teacher nor the classroom is out of control. A constructivist classroom is, in fact, highly organized. Students are given a lot of choices within the classroom, but those choices may be contained within parameters. Students are able to negotiate themes, but must abide by the range of literature that their curriculum prescribes. Students may design their own assignments, but the assignments must accommodate curriculum variables. The apparent paradox in this constrained freedom is highlighted by Daniel Sheridan, who comments on the use of structure in a constructivist classroom. Structure is one of the conditions of freedom, yet we cannot live it at that. For paradoxically, there can be no freedom without some element of constraint. Thus, within the structure of a learning situation, there are always some constraints. Yes, even in the most apparently free classroom, students are constantly making language choices. Still, they are not free in any radical or idealized sense. There is a lot of structure. What Sheridan is saying here is exemplified in a constructivist class. Unless kids are provided with behavioral parameters, nothing gets accomplished because they don't know what it is they're really supposed to do. But once these behavioral parameters are established, there can be a lot of choices within. The paradox about student-centered instruction is the more control you turn over to the students, the less you need to worry about control. And in fact, the students are quite able to look after themselves and even more, look after each other. In a constructivist classroom, control comes from students' involvement in responsibility rather than external imposition, freeing the teacher to focus on students' learning, a profitable situation for both students and teachers. Actively and interactively involved students' negotiated curriculum and redistribution of power, control, and responsibility all contribute to a relationship between students and teachers that promotes a situation where learning thrives. With the development of a constructivist philosophy, a teacher of any discipline is able to create a classroom environment within which students are able to become autonomous learners. So what is interactive teaching? Interactive teaching is that it is not something new or mysterious. If you are a teacher and you ask questions in class, assign and check homework, or hold class or group discussions, then you already teach interactively. Basically, interactive teaching is just giving students something to do, getting back what they have done, and then assimilating it to yourself so that you can decide what would be the best to do next. The word interactive reminds us of people with whom the learner interacts in order to learn. The interaction can be collaborative, and so we have collaborative teaching and learning. So, teacher's task. Ask specific, non-intimidating feedback questions and hot questions. Ask hot questions. Don't get fixated at low level of questioning. Make the focus of interaction clear. Create the climax favorable for genuine interaction. Do less talk to students, talk more. Interactive learning activities. Brainstorming sessions. Group brainstorming sessions are a great way to bring your students together to engage with whatever it is they are learning. Instead of thinking about the topic alone at their desk, they get to expand their ideas with other students, which will help them be more engaged and gain a new perspective into the lesson. Examples from entertainment. Students tend to get a deeper understanding of a concept when they can relate it to their own life. If you're teaching a concept you really want your students to grasp, a great way to drive home the lesson, Ask them to bring back related examples from their own life and in particular from entertainment. For example, is your history class learning about corrupt governments through the ages? Ask your students to come up with examples of similar corruption in their favorite films and TV shows, and then explain the similarities. Are your students reading Catcher in the Rye? Ask them to come up with some examples of Holden Caulfield-inspired characters in modern-day media. Free writing sessions. Obviously, the structure works in a classroom, but sometimes a lack of structure is just what your students need to engage, interact, and get their creative juices flowing. Give your students a free writing exercise. Give them a prompt, set a timer, and have them write whatever they want about the topic. Then, have them share about the experiences, and if they're comfortable, share some of the writing. This kind of open-ended creative time is a great way to keep your students engaged and make for a more interactive classroom environment in the process. What is collaborative teaching? Collaboration is beyond interaction. When students collaborate for learning, they do not just interact, they work together and help one another for a common goal. An educational approach to teaching and learning that involves group of students working together to solve a problem, complete a task, or create a product. Teacher's task. Begin with the conviction that every student can share something with the attainment of a goal. Structure tasks in such a way that the group goal cannot be realized without collaborating. Make the goal clear to all. Ensure the guidelines on procedures are clear, especially on how their performance is assessed. Must make clear that at the end of the activity, they have to reflect together. Collaborative learning. Active interaction with others, accountable to others, responsible to the group, heterogeneous grouping, positive interdependency, social skills taught directly. Collaborative learning activities. Think, write, pair, share. The Think, Write, Pair, Share strategy is a cooperative learning technique that encourages individual participation and is applicable across all grade levels and class sizes. Students think through questions using 3 distinct steps. 1. Think and write. Students think independently about a question that has been posed, forming ideas of their own and write them down. 2. Pair. Students are grouped in pairs to discuss their thoughts. This step allows students to articulate their ideas and to consider those of others. 3. Share. Student pairs share their ideas with a larger group, such as the whole class. Often students are more comfortable presenting ideas to a group with the support of a partner. In addition, students' ideas have become more refined through this 3-step process. Roundtable. Roundtable is a collaborative learning technique that allows students to assess prior knowledge, recall information, and practice communication skills. The steps are: first, write. Each student writes 1 or 2 or 3 sentences about a given topic on a piece of paper. Second, share. The paper is passed around to one group member at a time. Each group member responds in writing. Third, summarize. When the original is returned, the student reads the comments from the group and shares what the collective sense of what was said in that group about the topic. Jigsaw. Jigsaw is a collaborative learning technique that gives students practice in the acquisition and presentation of new material, in review, and in informed debate. Interdependence and status equalization are developed. The method is: first, each student on the team becomes an expert on one topic. Second, experts group with members from other teams assign the corresponding expert topic. Third, upon returning to their teams, each one in turn teaches the group. Fourth, students are all assessed on all aspects of the topic. Concept mapping. Concept mapping is a collaborative learning technique that allows students work in groups, a way of illustrating the connections that exist between terms or concepts covered in course material. The method is: first, students write terms from the course on a large piece of paper. Second, Lines are drawn connecting the individual terms to indicate the relationship between terms. Most of the terms in a concept map have multiple connections. Third, developing a concept map requires the students to identify and organize information and to establish meaningful relationships between the pieces of information. What is integrative teaching? An integrative approach allows learners to explore, gather, process, refine, and present information about topics they want to investigate without the constraints imposed by traditional subject barriers, putting together separate disciplines to make whole. Transdisciplinary teaching. Integrative learning is transdisciplinary. This means connecting lifeless subject matter to life itself. When the matter gets connected to life, it becomes alive and interesting. How can a teacher connect subject matter to life? Depart from teaching content for test purposes only. Reach the application phase of lesson development. 3-level teaching. Integrative teaching is also done when you integrate knowledge, skills, and values in a lesson. The 3-level teaching is teaching information for formation and transformation. Teacher's task in integrative teaching. To do an integrative teaching, a teacher needs a broad background for him or her to see readily the entry points for interdisciplinary integration. To do integrative teaching by transdisciplinary and 3-level teaching mode, teacher must be able to connect subject matter to values and to life as a whole. What is inquiry-based teaching? Also known as problem-based teaching, or simply as inquiry. This approach puts students' questions together at the center of the curriculum and places just as much value on the component skills of research as it does on knowledge and understanding of content. Constructivist teaching is also inquiry-based. This is teaching that is focused on inquiry or question. It espouses investigation, exploration, search, quest, research, pursuit, and study. Teacher's task. When using inquiry-based lessons, teachers are responsible for starting the inquiry process, promoting student dialogue, transitioning between small groups and classroom discussions, intervening to clear misconceptions or develop students' understanding of content material, and modeling scientific procedures and attitudes. Inquiry-based learning activities. Our plastic oceans. Why is plastic waste such a problem in our oceans, and how can we solve it? In the article, What Will It Take to Get Plastics Out of the Ocean?, freelance journalist Anja Krieger profiles the groundbreaking work being done by global innovators to combat the plastic pollutions of our oceans. She begins the article using Camilo Beach in Hawaii as a springboard for raising awareness of how much work we have ahead of us, the monumental task. According to her research, at the 14-kilometer stretch of coastline around South Point alone, about 15 to 20 tons or 14 to 18 metric tons of trash appear each year. It floats in and washes up on the beaches from as far away as Asia and North America. So what is being done to alleviate the problem? So from the article, designers and engineers have proposed marine drones and waterborne kites, even huge artificial drains for the gyres. A group of college students from London went so far as to promote the idea of creating biotechnological microorganisms to break up the plastics, and a Dutch architect wanted to turn the trash into a recycled island where people could settle sustainably. Despite the attention these concepts have gained, and most of them have remained pretty 3D renderings and so far unfulfilled ambitions. According to Plastic Oceans, we are producing roughly 300 million tons of plastic every year, 8 million of which end up in our oceans. With this kind of growth, a proactive solution is desperately needed to keep that plastic from continuing to end up in our waters as discarded litter. So here are the discussion questions. As 1. As plastic production evolves, what are some of the newest threats to the health of our environment? Second, what are some of the hidden costs of us not addressing the problem of plastics pollution in our oceans? Third, how does plastics pollution affect sea life and the industry built around it, both short and long term? Fourth, do you believe plastics pollution is the threat that we can conquer in the next decade? Why or why not? Fifth, what do you feel it will take to get plastics out of our oceans from a personal, community, global standpoint? Sixth, what do you feel might be some innovative ways we can stop plastics built up from choking our oceans and the life within them? Seventh, what's the one thing you would encourage people to begin doing right now to alleviate the plastics pollution problem? So here are the resources. The 10 Ways to Reduce Plastics Pollution, plasticsoceans.org, Center for Biological Diversity, Plastics in the Ocean Affecting Human Health, How Can We Keep Plastics Out of Our Ocean? Video. So, the world's biggest e-waste dump. So what are the dangers of consumer electronic waste that we must consider globally? Can you imagine stumbling upon a scene directly out of a post-apocalyptic nightmare world? Right here on Earth today, if you were to visit the Agboblogis wetland on the outskirts of Accra in Ghana, that's similar to what you'd see. So according to the Motherboard article inside the world's biggest e-waste dump, Agbobloshi is an illegal e-waste dumping ground where outdated technology from the West is dumped and left to poison the land, the air, and the people. Those who work in this area salvage parts for what amounts to only dollars a day. In many cases, students who should be in school are working in Agbobloshi. Environmental concerns include fluorocarbon emissions as well as lead, mercury and hydrogen cyanide poisoning seeping into the soil in and around the dumping ground. Many of the workers admit to using marijuana as a deterrent to the headaches and chest pains they experience due to the toxicity of the environment. According to the report, Agbobloshi, by ACT Mask, a respirator manufacturer that launched an air pollution awareness campaign in Accra's low-income areas months before releasing the report, the situation has not markedly improved even after over 20 years. So here are the discussion questions. First, where do you think this problem began? How far back can we trace the origin point? Second, having an idea where it started, what do you think could have been done to avoid it? Third, why do you think it is we allow things like this to continue happening in our world? Fourth, imagine having a dumping ground like this in your own city. How would your life and the lives of the community be affected? Fifth, where else in the world is this happening and what is being done to stop it? Sixth, who has made an effort to solve this problem so far and what have they done? Seventh, what could Agbobloshi do differently to help the environment and the people working there? Eighth, what affirmative action would you take to help solve this problem? So here are the resources: Agbobloshi in Pictures, Transforming Agbobloshi, Anatomy of a Myth, Ghana, Digital Dumping Ground, documentary. So, the next one, The True Cost of Digital Piracy. How does stealing on others' intellectual property impact the integrity of our entertainment industry? The CBC News article, Time to Assess the True Cost of Digital Piracy, provides a breakdown of how digital piracy hurts the industries in which it is commonly practiced. Many think that is a victimless crime. So according to the writer Joanne Sif, who is also a published author, this is far from the truth. Joanne begins by explaining that most artists and writers are not able to support themselves with the royalty payments from their work. In a particularly sobering moment in the article, she goes on to clarify just how her publishers calculate costs and royalties. So she's been a published author for 7 years with 2 books to her credit, and all in all has only received about $500 in royalties for her work. Digital piracy means that a copy of an artist's work can be downloaded and passed on literally thousands of times, with only a one-time payment going to the artist. So that means that digital piracy does something far more harmful than costs artists money. It actually robs creative ideas of their value. So here are the discussion questions. First, Do you agree or disagree with digital piracy? Why? Second, what could be some of the hidden costs of internet piracy? Third, put yourself in the role of an artist whose work has been pirated and shared illegally. What is your own personal reaction and response? Fourth, do you believe digital piracy will get better or worse as the time goes? Why or why not? Fifth, what do you feel is a more effective deterrent against digital piracy and why? Stricter laws or evasion strategies? Sixth, how much more do you think industry labels and companies could be doing to help artists suffering from the effects of digital piracy? What could they do? So here are the resources. Is the streaming industry lying about piracy? The war on internet piracy. Infographic, no big deal, copyright and piracy online. Top 10 most common digital piracy myths busted. Who's pirating what and why? So here are my sample scenarios for my topic, constructivist teaching. So, group debates, group demonstrations, and group reporting. So above mentioned are some activities in which constructivist approaches are manifested in the English language rooms. The construction and organization of ideas and opinions which are based on factual information. So the group work itself, where learning is collaboratively done. The integration of oneself macro skills in observing such issue or event and relates it in their day-to-day experiences. The construction of questions or follow-up questions that are relevant to the issue or the event. So that is all for this day. Thank you for listening.